Welcome to a series that we call the End Times, where we're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse to try our best to see what it is we can expect to happen in the end times, as well as what we should be doing in the end times, because we all have a role. You have a purpose on this earth in the advancing of God's kingdom, one way or the other. You're part of that plan, and I'm part of that plan. Whether we're in the end times or not, the advancement of His kingdom is still coming, and it's still playing out every single day. But it's important that we do see ourselves in the end times, because we do have a role in that, and it's a very, very important role. Literally, the term tribulation is the warring between the Antichrist and the saints. He's given authority by Satan to kill the saints and to kill those who stand up for Jesus Christ. So it's important that we see ourselves there. And what is that role? Oftentimes we're just raptured out and it's up to somebody else to deal with that. That is not the case. We've talked about that. We're in chapter 13, but in chapters 4, 7, 11, and 12, we showed that it's at the end of tribulation that rapture takes place. But regardless of where you are on that, it's irrelevant. Assuming we are here during the end times, it's important that we understand what's taking place here in chapter 13. Now, when we were in chapter 12, we were introduced to three characters. The woman, Israel. She gave birth to a child, Jesus, and the dragon tried to stop that from happening, Satan, who then could not, and then he sought to devour her offspring, and that's you and I. That's the descendants of Jesus Christ. Those are the Christians, and he seeks to devour them. And then immediately after we're shown that the war breaks out in heaven. Now, of course, time is irrelevant in heaven, so this is kind of, war broke out back when Adam and Eve were on the earth, and then Satan and a third of the angels were cast to the earth because there's nowhere for them until that bottomless pit is, of course, opened up. So they're on the earth seeking to devour, but ultimately Satan is desiring to be like God. And that's where we're at now. We're in Revelation 13, and we're exposed to the beast of the sea. Now, we talked in 1, the beast of the sea, and we'll just pick it up there. Then I stood on the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous name. Now, what this beast is it's essentially 10 kingdoms. These are 10 kings who are making up this beast, and they're ultimately, what we saw in Daniel, is 3 of those are overthrown. But ultimately, one of these leaders will stand up and be the Antichrist, and the others will just kind of be his cronies, so to say. So we'll pick it up in 2. Now, the beast which I saw was a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And that's where we left off now. So he's given this great authority by Satan to essentially establish Satan's kingdom instead of God's kingdom. So that's where we left off, and now we're going to pick it up in verse 3. I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" So we're going to talk about verse 3, this fatal head wound. This is a critical piece to, as Christians, identifying the Antichrist. It's a critical piece in seeing, for the rest of the people that will be worshiping the Antichrist, why they think he is like Christ. Because what did Jesus do? He took mortal wounds, and he died, and he was raised from the dead. And what we're going to see here is one of these heads is going to take a mortal wound, and then that mortal wound is going to be healed. Now, let's start with saying Satan does not have the power to raise people from the dead. And that's a critical piece of this. So it's not like somebody died and then Satan raised him from the dead. It's definitely, it's trickery. There's powers of principalities at play here, but Satan does not have the ability to raise people from the dead. And it's very important we see that, nor does Satan have the ability to resurrect himself either. So let's kind of take this and see, well, what's going on here? Because we're going to see this again a couple other times in chapter 13 as well as in chapter 14 of this head. So I like to look at the actual Greek words that are written, or Hebrew words, depending on which book we're looking at. But here in Revelation, it's Greek. So we're going to take a look at what the Greek words were here. And as we look at chapter 3, it says one of the heads. Now, the word for heads is cephalon, and it's the capto, it's the cap, it's head. It's literally or figuratively, and that's very important, the head. So it's literally the cap, the head of the body, but it's figuratively also used as the head of kind of an organization or a head of a military, that kind of thing. Let's go on. And it appeared to be fatally wounded. Now, this word wounded is esphagmanon, and this is to slay, kill by violence. So this isn't like a thing where like a kingdom just ended and therefore it took a fatal head wound. And a lot of people speculate that. That's not what this is. This word is literally to slay or kill with violence. That's what's taking place here. So there's a violent assault on the Antichrist, potentially the Antichrist, and we're going to kind of come back to that, of what is this head. And there's a lot of speculation, and again, we're not going to look at speculation, we're not looking at commentaries, we're just looking at what the Word of God is, so we're not making any assumptions here. Most likely it's the Antichrist, could be a country, but that, I think we get back to that slain by violence thing is pretty significant. And he takes a mortal head wound. Now this is mortal as death, or physical or spiritual death. And the word wound is plege. It's a blow or it's a stripe, a wound, an affliction, a plague, a stroke by implication, wounding for calamity. So there's some sort of violent attack that takes place on one of the heads of this beast. And we're just going to kind of take a look at that for a little bit. Now, first and foremost, this is a mimic of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ died and was raised from the dead. Now, I'm going to go back to Satan cannot raise people from the dead. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to the second beast, the beast of the land, for a second, because he makes people worship the head that was wounded. And there's something that's freaky out then that takes place here. So we're going to jump to 13, verse 14. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. So it's a deceptive thing. He's using trickery here. Telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. And that's pretty critical too. So now, not only do we see that this head is taking a fatal wound by violence, but it's fatal wound with a weapon now. Now we're looking at some sort of weapon. And let's keep going in 15. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, we're going to come back to what is this image of the beast, and how is it that the second beast gave life to it. Now, keep in mind, John's writing this 2,000 years ago, so there wasn't any sort of technology. There obviously weren't any sort of technology that would allow you to do that, but there is now. There's definitely technology today that will allow you to bring up an image of a person and give life to it and have it speak and cause everybody to worship it. It's a pretty simple thing to do with very basic computer technology. I don't know if that's what that is, but I do know that Satan does not have the ability to raise anybody from the dead. And again, if we go back to verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. Not the beast, but the image of the beast. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Very fascinating verse there. But let's kind of go back to, and we'll dig deep into what that is when we get there, but we're going to kind of go back to this, the first mention of this mortal head wound here in verse 3, chapter 13, verse 3. Now, I want to say there's a couple possibilities, biblically speaking, that this is. It's easy to say that this is actually a person that takes a fatal head wound. That's an easy thing to say. That's going to be my guess. Again, I can't say for sure what this is, but I can say that the Greek words talk about a cap or a head that takes a violent attack with a weapon, and then an image is made of whoever took that violent attack, and then life was given to that image. That's a very important piece. Now, if it is a man, what we see is this is a very identifying feature. Now, one thing that makes me terribly sad about these verses in chapter 13 is how easy people today follow lies. I mean, it just seems like I can get on and say anything. And as long as I put it on the internet, people are going to believe it, because there's institutions like Facebook, they're just going to feed that stuff to you. As long as you're clicking, they're going to keep feeding it to you. So because of social media and things like that, I can really say anything I want. I don't need to support it with facts anymore. That's not even a thing. People will buy into anything that a person says as long as it agrees with what they think. And I find that terribly sad, because there are many professed, I'm going to use the quotes, Christians who are going to easily worship the image of the beast. Easily, because it's going to feed them what they want. It's going to feed them what they want. And it's terribly sad, because the world will marvel at this, and they will begin to worship that beast. And even though they know what Scripture says about Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago being nailed to a cross and raising himself from the dead 3 days later, even though they know that, they're still going to worship the beast, because they're going to marvel at the fact that here he took a fatal head wound and he shows up to work the next day. But they don't actually see him, they see his image. And that's a very important. People are so easily deceived today. I mean, if we would have been making this video 10 years ago, I wouldn't even be talking about this, because people looked at facts. You know, when I was in college and I wrote a paper, I couldn't just say words. I had to support it with some sort of something. It had to have some sort of support from some sort of doctrinal thesis or something. Today, I get to say anything I want. As long as I can throw it out on YouTube or Facebook, people are going to buy it. And it's sad. But that is what's going to take place, because people today are more focused and worshiping of political leaders than ever before. Ever before. More so, Christians are more worshiping of political leaders than I've ever seen in my life. It's a tragedy, but they will easily be led astray by some sort of political figure who then will take a fatal head wound, and then because they will see his image speaking to them the next day, they will begin to worship him. So much so that they're willing to kill for him. That's pretty messed up. I mean, ultimately what's taking place when we get to this second beast, the second beast is the one you really need to worry about, because he's going to be the one that's going to make you take the mark of the beast. He's going to be the one that makes you worship the beast. He's going to be the one that really pulls all the strings. But it's ultimately going to lead to most of the world, again, I'm going to use my quotes, Christians are going to easily go worship the beast, because he's going to feed them what they want to hear. And that's what they're doing now to many degrees. But there's going to be a few who are going to say, you know what, that is not the Christ. That is not the Christ. Because Jesus said in Matthew 24, many will say, oh look, there's the Christ. Because he's going to appear, he's going to be able to speak, he's going to look like he resurrected himself from the dead, and he's going to be sitting up a throne in the temple of God in Jerusalem, and people are going to worship him like crazy. like crazy. They'll do anything for them. I mean, we see politically now, gosh, we see families being divided and almost a civil war in our country because of a couple political leaders. And now, what do you think this is going to look like? Now fast forward to this event. I mean, people are so easily led astray today, you know, goodness gracious. Now, if you all of a sudden are a world leader and everybody's following you, and then you take a fatal head wound and suddenly you show up to work the next day, it's going to be a pretty easy thing to do to get people to worship this thing, because it's pretty easy to get people to worship political leaders now. And they don't even resurrect themselves from the dead. They just speak words and people just buy it. So, you know, this, in my opinion, is really one of the most tragic events that takes place in the end times, because it's about, you know, when we read about the death of a lot of people, or we read about, you know, a third of the earth being destroyed, or we read about, you know, the rest of mankind who doesn't have the mark of the beast being destroyed, you know, or the rest of mankind that doesn't have the mark of God being destroyed. You know, that's tragic and all, but that's very temporal. It's very temporary. I mean, if somebody says denounce Christ or I'm chopping your head off, and I say, well, no way, Jose, and they chop my head off, well, now I just spend eternity in glory. But this means eternity in hell, for a very temporal satisfaction, a very, very temporal satisfaction. Because again, you know, 10 years ago, if somebody took a fatal wound and you put him on the internet and suddenly you can see him and he's talking, you know, we would have said, well, hey, wait a second, what's going on there? But today, people buy that. They'll buy right into it. They'll easily be deceived, just like they're easily deceived today. It's very, very tragic and sad. But that's kind of what we got going on here. You know, other possibilities looking at biblical thing is that this head is a country, that the country takes a fatal wound, and then the country comes back. But, you know, again, I'm just going to go back to the, you know, the words, the actual Greek words. You know, the head, it's a cap, it's the top of the body. Takes a violent wound with the weapon. And that's a very significant thing to say. It's not kind of a roundabout way of describing things. It's a very specific description of an event. And I think that's going to, as Christians, what we're going to see is two different Christians will see two different things. One Christian will see that he is like Christ. Let's worship him. The other one will say, that is not Christ. That is the Antichrist. And they'll declare Jesus Christ, and then guess what's going to happen? As many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. You know, that's what tribulation is all about. So ultimately, what you're going to see in tribulation is you're going to see a 3.5-year war between the Antichrist and his world army, and many, many, many Christians that are following, if not most Christians following him. And then you're going to see the remnant of Jesus Christ and 144,000 Jews marked by God warring against that system. They will prevail for 3.5 years. And then after 3.5 years, the Antichrist will overcome them and kill them. And then they'll be resurrected on the third day, and that's where the rapture occurs. So, you know, and again, those things we talked about, we talked about that back in 10, 11, and 12. So that's, you know, that's an old topic, but that's kind of what we're looking at here. So the beasts of the sea, made up of 10 kings, one of them will take a fatal head wound and then be resurrected. And we will see that image, not in person, there's an image. We won't see that person, because again, Satan cannot resurrect anybody from the dead. So this will be an image. It's the second beast that we really got to worry about. He will breathe life into this image. He will make everybody take the mark of the beast. He will make everybody worship the beast. He will rule, essentially, the entire planet by showing this Antichrist as the Christ. So, you know, and again, a lot of people are going to fall for it, because a lot of people fall for stuff. I mean, people fall for stuff so easily. We don't even need to support things with facts anymore. We just got to say words and people believe it, and that's the sad place we're at. Because, you know, social media and the internet's feeding us what we want to hear. So if we hear it, it must be true. If we hear it and we like it, it must be true. If we hear it and we don't like it, it must not be true. So a lot of people are going to easily be fooled by this false resurrection. Easily be fooled by the false resurrection. So love to hear your thoughts on that. Put it in the comments below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel through Patreon, that link's below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.